Hello, everybody. This is Maximus, and this is the first time that I am showing my face. So you get to see my face for the first time. For those who watch it, I did a video on the problem with infinity, and now we'll be doing one on the problem of theurgy and henotheism, somehow Neoplatonist justifying henotheism and polytheism. I will be reading the definition given by Proclus on the Timaeus. The Henods of the gods are superior to being, and prior to them is the one which transcends all beings, just as the Henods, and is not participated by them, just as the Henods which come after and from it are described and in fact participated by being, and they also do not penetrate to the lowest level. For it is neither possible to call matter always existing, we usually call it non-being, nor perceive a call which comes into being, since it cannot be acted upon, lest it be destroyed and disappear entirely. Each Henad communicates its character, its idiotis, through the whole series of beings which are attracted to it. Each the beings in declining series possesses this character to a lesser degree than the god, according to its rank in the series. Thus each god stamps its own individuality upon each being in its series, but without diminishing its individuality in itself. Its individuality being its idiotization, which they receive from the one, but they're prior to all things. So the individuality pre-exists among the divine themselves, distinguishing the Henads. In accordance with the limitless therein the divine diet, but otherness exists the intellects, the nous, the second hypostasis, dividing off the wholesome parts, allocating the intellect, the powers, dividing the different things for their own, speaking of their conception of celestial hierarchy. The angelic, celestial objects that are eternal and necessary processions. Kind of again in the bodies, there's a physical separation, giving different properties to different things. Speaking the body for them is matter. So what's the lowest level of being in the hierarchy? According to Proclus, he will speak of the hierarchies of categories like Porphyry does on the tree, the Porphyrian tree. Their mistake, however, is making the totality of beings as an internal dialogue from the one. Then creation becomes, well, a necessary procession, a necessary act of being as the one. So this means that the internal dialogue is no different than the act of creating. So it's basically an image or an expression of what the gods are, as they are the um, second highest of being, the second hypostasis, with their idiotization, which somehow they're modes of the one, which doesn't make any sense if you consider the fact that um, the one doesn't relate to anything and is itself nothing, which we can understand. However, the view here that they're espousing is that the other one is prior to one itself, is not a name or a pronoun in the neuter. It's beyond anything, including negation, affirmation. It's beyond being and non-being. So it's beyond the whole series of an antithesis of wholes and parts. Here it's the dialectic. To attain to the dialectic through intellectual processes is threefold, according to Plato and the Timaeus, because the threefold is triad. So the you get the imparticiple, the one participating, given being or mode of being, giving its distinctions, and when that's applied with dyad to a model, because in creation it's it's being given through the second hypostasis, and to the third is the world soul, which the world, as Plato says in page 19 of the Timaeus, is image after eternity. Well, the one is pre-eternal along with the gods, as they get their definition from Plotinus and the Aeneids. The one is pre-eternal, because eternity, the notion of eternity, is derived from a necessary act of creation. So in that sense, the eternity they know is not the eternity of the one, which isn't eternal in that sense, but precedes eternity as a necessary act, or actus purus for the gods or the monads, because there cannot be a principle of opposition of relations. But the problem here is the argument that I'll give in the preceding syllogisms that I've written down. It doesn't make any sense. How do these gods have access to eternal principles if they themselves are not the ground of indivisible eternal realities, being the eternal activities, processions, the super logic which transcends all affirmation and negations? I'll give you the classical problem of non-contradiction. 1. Either the gods are themselves finite, limited by their participation, and cannot be truly eternal, but eternally dependent upon the true and absolute supersensuality. These gods themselves participate in order to mediate supersensual hadad unity, in distinction from multiplicity. At any level, of gods, beings to be manifested and coherent at any level, the gods themselves cannot be ground of basis for supersensual activities like wisdom, logic, or order. Therefore, the gods cannot ground order nor creation, nor can they make knowledge possible, as they themselves aren't super logical, but like some causally dependent law, ground of possibilities. Therefore, the gods self-destruct into absurdity and make the categories not a thing, and are self-refuting to ground absolutes within gods who are not themselves supersensually beyond affirmations and negations, making them causally deficient and mutable. It can't be true that the gods are themselves the groundable being if they themselves are contingent upon themselves to be what they are by definition, which is prior to being, according to Proclus on the chain of being. They are themselves at the chain of being, according to the Porphyrian tree, which is 7 and 6 categories, taking from Aristotle 10 categories. But they're above that. They're a step above that in the hierarchy. It's a different hierarchy. So the argument here is that the gods themselves cannot be the ground of both the processions, because it's an eternal dialogue, and neither can they be the ground of all the distinct relations in the hierarchy, because it begs the question to say that they're prior to things, but they themselves are still constituted in whatever manner they want, in whatever mode, in individuality, which for them is not per se to do with them having ousia, as they're not, primary or secondary substance, but they mediate relations, the modes of gods, the processions of goodness, being the eternal divine ideas, is what creation is patterned after. So there's the dilemma, which is classic. If the one has no relation to being, but is the source of being, yes, but In what way is it related? Because the second hypostasis is the gods and the intellect. Creation is an act of intellection, modes of procession. But they themselves are mediated. So what mediates them? Themselves? No, the one. The problem here is that the one is absolutely beyond anything. It's not a thing in the sense of categories. But that begs the question, how does it relate to anything? And how does it mediate beings? It can't. That is grounded here, the problem of non-contradiction, in the impossibility of even. How do people themselves, like Neoplatonists, whoever they are, say the one is this and the one is that, if they themselves don't have access to absolute unity? How are they saying that, and what basis are they saying that? What metric? Just begs the question. They're speaking temporally about these eternal mediations. And as much as creation is an eternal mediatory act, that is an internal dialogue of the logos, the monad. The monad for them isn't a definition for God, because theos and theotis, the anurokos, is the gods in self-contemplation, which is to say that the creation and everything we see, perceive, the sensible, the matter is the lowest form of being, but is in itself not being, somehow relates to the eternal necessary activities, because the one is in itself its own willing and its own loving. Therefore, termination doesn't exist, nor does spontaneity. So how do any theurgist in this schema get to know the one? Because according to Porphyry, the gods can't purgate sin, whatever they mean by that in the English translation. Then the one must purgate and purify you through fire. That isn't an intelligible fire, but a unity. And that is what they believe theoria to be. That's what they believe true knowledge is. But that doesn't make any sense, because the delimitation implies the God's participation in how we ascend to more higher being is still limited. So the processions themselves, they violate the so-called super-essential henad or unity and the divine principles, because the dyad is the processions and divine ideas applied to real separability. For them, separability is divisibility, but it's not in the such as you get in the Aristotelian scheme of heliomorphism, which does posit raw matter and substance. For them, they don't. Matter isn't matter and substance. For them, matter is divisible bodies, which have constituent parts. But in what sense constituent is sensibility? But sensibility is merely a token denoting the intelligible realities beyond the material realm, being bodies. Bodies in the senses I've described before. It's the less known being as the body, because they believe the creation, or the cosmos as a whole, including the heavens, is threefold, is triadic, so it's tripartite in all senses, but differentiates between somehow grounding the threeness and the unities, and the unities in the threeness is perfection, unity, in love. But again, this is all based on the idea that the one grounds all beings, and it's itself not mediated by anything, but it's not mediated by anything. So it doesn't make any sense. It's self-refuting. How do the theurgists know about the one? And how do the gods themselves know about the one? Even if we grant that, they're beyond that. On what presupposition do we accept that the ones are anything? Nothing. You can't know that. Because in order for you to know that, you must have absolutely perfect knowledge. And I know they say, well, no, you don't. Well, yes, you do. Because there's nothing relative or quantitative in what sense we know God. Because for them to know God means a detachment of material things That includes because the body is deprivation of perfect unity in the gods. But to get to the one is through the gods, but the gods themselves are not the one. So there's clearly an efficacious problem. The communication of participations in beings are in as such as the grounding of relations are themselves mediatory, not sources. To say that the mediatories, the mediators of the gods and the hypostases, the second and third hypostases, become the one, therefore they would be destruction. For instance, you'd be like saying there could be two unoriginate gods possess the same mode or property. To say that you possess the same mode or property is to say that there's no single source, there's two, making it composition and self-destruction. The two cannot ground the others. The unoriginate cannot ground the unoriginate, and hence you get to the problem of self-destruction and reductio ad absurdum. The point herein being applied is that the gods cannot be the ground of all the processions, including ethics, whatever, anything in any category cannot be grounded to the gods, because the gods themselves are not the one. And how does the super essential beyond being God, whatever, it's not called God, how does that relate? I don't care whatever manner, relate to the gods. It can and doesn't. Therefore, the Neoplatonist fails to give an account for categories or possibilities of knowledge or metaphysics, and is self-refuting. Because their schema, as I've said before, and I'm going to quote Iamblichus on the gods real quick, and Parmenides, about otherness. Otherness being the internal indwelling, or divine contingency, which they believe, without being the temporal contingency of accidental composition and unity as Aristotle would have it. I should have had this out before. Hold up. Sorry about that. I'm just trying to get it. Um, Here we go. I got it. De Mysteriis. It's called De Mysteriis in the Latin translation. Despite the difference concerning the union with the One, both Iamblichus and Plotinus agreed that the nature of the One, being singular, unified, soul-fathering, etc., is beyond this point that it become radically different. So in the Apophaticism, the next principle, Iamblichus's cosmology, is called De Mysteriis. The Demic intellect called Amun, the Egyptian tongue, the god among the De Mysteriis 32. The gods almost identified with the Greeks as Zeus. Again, this is a classical Greek polytheism that you'd get in the allegories of the poets, as they would interpret as divine powers. The implicit schema is called the demiurgos ton chalon, the creator of the whole, or rather wholes, implying cosmos, because they believe beauty, proof of beauty is the whole. On most, Zeus is responsible for the work of creation, a divine mind that is capable of looking to the forms and applying them to the world to generate creation, because they believe creation is an eternal generation. As I said, the internal dialogue is creation is in an eternal, loving, weird, eternal spherical movement in the Logos. And the mysterious Iamblichus refers to Phaedrus when he calls the intellect leader and the king of the realm being the art which creates the universe. 33. God is simultaneously defined as Phata and Osiris, because he acquires epithets according to their powers and activities, processions. This God is the last being of realm of intellect, the last principle that is monad of the celestial realm is also called the realm of being. Because I said before, the Platonian, the Proclean idea the the chain of being for him, that the being at the highest level, the hypostasis transcends being in the way that he describes it with the Porphyrian tree, is neither intrinsic nor extrinsic because it transcends Aristotle's dyad, whilst not giving an account for how that is, whilst they do make a lot of arguments. This is important because the god can begin with theurgy proper as one perform rites. Again, to initiate, have an initiatory process that's occultic, but Neoplatonists don't practice theurgy the way it was practiced back then, because it would be seen as illegal in some European states. Sorry, European locations in the West. Um, is to partake in polytheistic rituals. Because you have to partake in sacrificial offerings to the god in contemplation in order to even know the first order of condition. Which is begging the question of how do you know that and how does it apply to the one? It doesn't. For Iamblichus, sin is made possible through ritual practice when given the right of circumstances, make contact with the gods. Not only by their omnipresent dunamis, but very well by their manifestation. Remember I said that the gods are a mode of manifestation of the divine intellect. Um, so no, the gods cannot ground distinctions in unity, as I said, because they must rely on the strict identification of the absolute being radically different, as I just quoted. So there's a strict apophatic negation. But how's a strict apophatic negation if we're speaking the sense of it's identified with its nature? The one's nature is absolutely simple, but again, that's just a description. But still, how do those relations relate to the gods? If they themselves can't ground the relations of eternal realities being the processions, how do they themselves mediate the realities like the processions, the categories of beings? They can't, because it's internally self-refuting. With all this technical language they babble on about, it doesn't help us with practical life. That's one criticism that you can apply to them. So they're not rational. They're not rational and they're inconsistent. Um, so because the way they view the world, for instance, is necessary. Because if the world is necessary, then that doesn't give us divine freedom. And if there's no divine freedom, then there's no free will. There's no free will in any sense. I don't care how you define it. There's no natural predetermination. And therefore, it's self-refuting. Not only that, self-refuting, it denies spontaneity. So it denies there's intrinsic compositions, like there's nothing intrinsic about ethics anymore. Because you just imitate the forms. But that doesn't grant you the voluntary autonomous volition. It doesn't exist in their view. Because it's sort of individuated, highly metaphysized concepts. Which, how do you relate to the physical world? You don't. You can't. You can try. But there's nothing intrinsically communicated. So it doesn't make any sense. And on what basis is the ultimate principle unity in the first place? If you're speaking from a temporal point of view, how do you have access, just purely mentally, to the one communicating? Do you have secret esoteric knowledge for these triads? I mean, it's oddly ridiculous and retarded, quite frankly. Stupid. As I should have said rather than retarded, but Um, so they can't even agree among themselves about what is considered the correct approach, the correct basis for their views. That's just the criticisms I have in the arguments I've been given to why the gods can't ground uh, two eternal principles, because it's self-destructive. It doesn't make the creation possible, nor does it make the world or the gods themselves the ground of themselves. The one is the ground of the gods. But if the gods ground individuality in an invisible modality, then the one isn't needed. But in this scheme, it is, where the one is radically opposed and different to the gods. Because the Porphyry says that, gods can't purgate. So how do the divine energies, they believe, the processions, relate to the world of matter and form without diminishing their unity? This is the dilemma they have to answer. Um, because the divine supercentral unity is strictly identified as the one. The one is itself its own processions, which are somehow mediated. But what mediates the mediator? In this schema, the gods. But the gods have to ground the prior relations, which they don't ground themselves. The one does. But how does the one relate? How do the gods relate to the one? They don't. Because they're causally inefficacious. Nothing relates to the one. So, hopefully you enjoyed my video. I've done one video on infinity, and I will continue that another time. But this has been something I've come across recently and I wanted to address. So, I hope you enjoyed, and have a blessed day. Thank you.